Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. This is one of our webinars in our memory improvement course, and today's topic is the link system. We're going to talk about how the link system can help you improve your memory. So I want to start off by asking you a simple question. Do you think you have a bad memory? Now, a lot of people, I hear this all the time. A lot of people say, well, I feel like my memory isn't in tip-top shape. Some people think it might be their age. But if your answer was yes, I want you to know that your memory is probably a lot better than you think. I want you to know there's no such thing actually as a poor memory. There are only trained or untrained memories. So if you feel like you have a poor memory, it's not a poor memory, it just means it's an untrained one. And since you're watching this webinar, my guess is that you're looking to train your memory, and that's exactly what we're here to do. So let's go ahead and get started training for the day. So today's topic is the link system, and the link system requires you to link one piece of information to the next. And we're going to train ourselves into using this system today. The link system consists of two steps. First, you form a visual image of each item that needs to be learned, and then second, you associate the image of each item with the image of the next item. Okay, so you're taking one image, you visualize it, and then you take the next image that's in sequence and you try to visualize that as well. Now, if you're dealing with abstract words or things that are hard to visualize, you can use something called the substitute word system, which we covered very much in depth in a previous webinar. So if you're signed up for this memory improvement course, definitely check out the memory improvement lesson that was on the topic of the substitute word system. Now we'll talk about it briefly in this one, but that webinar goes into a lot of depth. Now with this link system, you start by forming this visual association between the first two items, and then between the second and third item, and then between the third and fourth item, and so on and so forth. And you don't try to associate every item with every other item in one big picture. Instead, you associate the items two at a time. Now, the reason for this name should be obvious. You're linking items together in the form of a chain of associations, and we already know that association plays a very big role in how we remember things. The link system is actually best used for serial learning tasks, where you have a series of items that need to be remembered in a certain order. So that could be maybe a speech, that could be a list of things to do. Maybe you're reading about a certain kind of, let's say, engineering process, and you need to know it step by step, or any other kind of like step-by-step information that needs to be memorized. The link system will help you remember all of those items in order. Okay, don't panic here, but I want you to remember these 8 items in order. Okay, I'll give you a minute to do this. Now, don't write them down. I just want you to look at them and try to remember these items as best as you can. And it's no easy task, but try as best as you can. Okay, now if I took it away from you for a moment, did you remember all the items? Most people don't, but don't worry if you didn't. I'll go back and show you the list in a moment. Now these 8 items could be, they could be a number of things. Here are the 8 items again. Most people, the reason why they have trouble remembering all these items in order is because they don't have a trained memory. They're not using any kind of a strategy or a system, and that's what we're going to use the link system to remember this list of 8 items. And this could be a list of any 8 pieces of information. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, this could be 8 things in a speech. It could be 8 things, in a sales presentation, or 8 tasks that you have to do during the day. So let's train ourselves with this link system. So we start by creating our first link. And the first thing that we have to remember is pen, right? You see pen and shoe. We have to link pen and shoe together. So how are we going to do that? If you can picture a familiar pen, that's certainly going to help. You have to picture this in your mind's eye. And when we say mind's eye, you just have to kind of think about it and see if you could visualize it inside of your head. Okay? Now, it's possible to do this, but you've got to make sure that you're not just thinking, okay, pen, shoe, whatever. You actually have to stop for a moment and visualize it. For some people, it helps for them to close their eyes for a moment and visualize a pen. Or you might think of a pen that you already have, or it could be a really fancy pen. The first item is pen. Now, the second item is shoe. And to start the link system, we need to associate pen and shoe. Now, it's important that these two items are visually associated in some kind of a ridiculous way. So you need to form some kind of silly or impossible reminder or connection between the pen and the shoe. Now, there are many choices, many ways you could do this, but you need to choose one that works best for you. Here's some ideas just to throw them out there. You could see yourself wearing gigantic pens instead of shoes. Or you can imagine yourself writing with a shoe instead of a pen. Or you can see millions of pens flying out of a shoe. The idea here is that you pick an image that is easiest for you to visualize. And you keep that image in mind, even if it doesn't make sense. In fact, it's better if the imagery does not make sense. Now, normally you would imagine whatever image works for you, but for the purpose of this webinar, I want to keep things consistent here, and to follow along with this particular presentation, I'm going to suggest a certain kind of image that I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine that you are wearing gigantic pens instead of shoes. Okay? So make sure that you imagine that right now. You are wearing some pens instead of shoes, giant pens. Okay, they're big enough for you to actually walk on them, almost like skis. You can think of them almost like that. They are pens, but we need to remember shoes. So we need to remember gigantic pens being worn as shoes. So you can only keep in mind, you can only see how well this link system is going to work if you try it out on your own. So I want you to imagine that. Take a moment to stop and think about those gigantic pens that you're wearing as shoes. Got it? Okay, let's move on. Now we need to create another link. So we just did the previous one, which was pen and shoe, and now we need to do shoe and book. Okay? So forget about the past image that we did. You were wearing these gigantic shoes that were actually pens. Now we just forget about that. We need to associate shoe and book. So this is our next link or connection that we need to make. At this point, we're assuming that we already know the shoe, so it can be used to remind us of something else, in this case, a book. So I want you to imagine now a large book walking around wearing some big shoes. Imagine this large book just walking around, and it's got these ginormous shoes that it's wearing. Okay, got it? Again, make sure that you're visualizing this in your mind's eye. A large book is walking around with shoes. I know it makes no sense, but it's better if it doesn't. This image is going to stick if you can really visualize that in your head. Okay, stop thinking about the shoe and book. Let's move on to the next one. We're going to take a book and an airplane. I want you to see in your mind's eye, inside your mind, I want you to visualize a large book flying on top of an airplane. How would that even look? Can you picture it? And also make sure you're exaggerating it. This is not your typical book. It's a large book on top of a plane, and the airplane is flying across the sky. Okay? Hopefully you've got that imagined in your head. We're going to go ahead and move on from here. And now we need to imagine airplane and eyeglasses. So again, you see what we're doing with the link system here. We're taking the previous image, the last image of the previous link, airplane, and we're now taking the new information, airplane and glasses. So we need to visually link airplane and glasses. Now I want you to picture an airplane flying with large eyeglasses. Okay, so how would that look? I think it's pretty easy to picture something like that. You can put some big eyeglasses towards the front of the airplane, and it's just flying around, and the eyeglasses are there so we can see better. Okay, how would that look like? And make sure that you can actually picture this in your head, because we're going to move on now. We've got to remember now we take the previous item, eyeglasses, and we got to associate it with fish. So how are we going to do that? I want you to picture a fish wearing eyeglasses. I know that's a little odd, but that's okay. Try to picture a fish wearing eyeglasses. Okay, if you're having trouble with that, let me give you a little bit of help here. How about that? So, hopefully this visual will help you remember eyeglasses on a fish. Okay? let's move on from that scary looking fish with its eyeglasses and move on to fish and Benadryl. Now, Benadryl was purposely put in here to make the visual even harder to imagine. But I want you to, what if you don't even know what Benadryl is, okay? If you don't know what Benadryl is, we are going to use the similar sound technique, which was discussed in our webinar, the substitute word system, but I'm going to go over it briefly here. Let me explain how we're going to associate fish and Benadryl. Okay, I want you to visualize. You can do this by the, again, similar sound technique. What does Benadryl sound like? Benadryl. To me, it sounds like Bent-a-drill. Benadryl. Okay, well, let's picture a gigantic fish bending a drill. Okay? Picture that for a moment. Now, I don't have an image for that, but think about that. A gigantic fish bending a drill. Okay, hopefully you've got that big fish bending the drill. I'm laughing a little bit because when I'm picturing it in my head, it's actually kind of a funny image. And that's good. It's supposed to, if you can make them funny, if you can make them stick out and silly, that's good. Now we got to move on to our next one. Benadryl and Typewriter. Okay. So how are we going to imagine this? I want you to, again, let's go back to bent drill and imagine this. A bent drill is using a typewriter. Picture that bent drill just typing away at that old typewriter. You hear the clicking sound. You see the bent drill is typing. Again, doesn't have to make sense, but try to visualize a bent drill on a typewriter typing away. Okay? Now, that was the link system. We just went through 8 items. I hope you're ready to amaze yourself now, because we're going to test to see, how well did this stick. Now, how well it sticks usually is dependent on whether or not you were visualizing the information. That's why I kept stressing, make sure that you are visualizing it. Take a moment to think and visualize in your head what it looks like. So let's start off. We got to think of the first item, which we know is pen. And what does that remind you of? Think about, what does it remind you of the pen? Remember, we previously formed a silly visualization associated with a pen. Can you remember it? I'll give you a moment to think about it. And if you said shoe, you were correct. Okay? So you probably remember we were wearing gigantic pens instead of shoes. Now what we do with this link system is we say, hey, so what does the shoe remind us of? Think about that for a moment. What was the visualization that you remember with the shoe? All right, I'm going to give you the answer here. And if you don't want to hear the answer and you still want to think, if you're watching the recording, you can just simply hit pause here. But I'm going to tell you the answer here right now. The answer was book. So shoe was supposed to remind us of book. We pictured a large book walking around with these really big shoes. Okay? Let's move on to the next one, because we just reminded ourselves of book. So now we're on book, and we need to think, what did book remind us of? Do you remember anything? Can you remember what was the book doing? What was going on? And you probably remember, if you said airplane, you were correct, because we pictured an airplane flying around with a giant book on top of it. And now we're on airplane. Now we got to think, what does airplane remind us of? And if you can remember, and if you think back to it, you can picture the airplane was reminding us of the eyeglasses, because we were picturing the eyeglasses on top of that airplane. Now, once we get to eyeglasses, we're thinking all over again. You probably see how this link system is working and actually how it's pretty effective. We're just doing 8 items. You can definitely expand this. What do eyeglasses remind you of? Take a moment to think about that. We saw the eyeglasses on the airplane, and then what else? Eyeglasses. Where else did we see eyeglasses? Now, if you said fish, you were correct. Do you remember this fish here? Remember that crazy looking fish? Well, there it is. And what does fish remind you of? What was the fish doing? Think about that. What was the visual that we remember with fish? I'm going to give you the answer here. The answer was Benadryl. Benadryl Why? Because we remembered a gigantic fish that bent a drill, remember? And because Benadryl was a little more abstract, it was a little more vague than some of the other items we were covering, we had to use the similar sound technique to say, okay, Benadryl, that's too hard for me to visualize. Let me think bent a drill instead. And then I'll remember, oh yeah, Benadryl. So you see how that works. Now, because we're on Benadryl now, we have to think, okay, well, what does Benadryl remind me of? Bent a drill. What was going on with Benadryl? Can you remember the visualization? Now, if you said typewriter, you were correct. Typewriter, I'm sure you remember this bent drill typing away at that old typewriter. Do you see I hope you see how this works, because if you were able to get them all, very good. If you didn't get them all, no worries. You can work on trying to visualize those a little better. Usually the reason people don't get them all maybe at first is because they either didn't bother to do the visualization, or maybe the visualization that I said just wasn't crazy enough to stick into your brain. So, it's something that I was giving you the visuals just as an example here, but you can always create these visuals on your own. And we'll talk about some strategies for creating those visuals in a little bit. But this is the power of the link system. And remember I asked you earlier, do you think that you have a poor memory? The fact of the matter is that your memory is a lot better than you think. You simply need to train it and learn some systems. And the link system is a great way to learn a series of information that needs to be put in order. Okay? Now, by the way, we can even go backwards. Start with the typewriter. What does the typewriter remind you of? Think about that. And keep going through the link. See if you could go really quickly. I'm just going to give you maybe 30 seconds. I want you to go backwards. Start with the typewriter and think about what that reminds you of, and immediately think about what did that remind you of, and so on and so forth. See if you could get through all 8 in 30 seconds. Go. Or if you need more time, pause the video here if you're watching the recording. All right, let me stop you there. And I want you to know that this list of 8 items mentioned earlier these were randomly selected. They could represent anything. They could be a sequence of 8 items that you need to remember for a presentation. And if that was the case, then you wouldn't need your notes. Or it could be a sequence of 8 important concepts that you need to remember from a chapter that you need to remember for a test. This could also be a sequence of maybe 8 things that you have to do during the day, and maybe you have to do those things in order. That's where this would be useful. This could also be a list of 8 items that you need to get from the store. Now, keep in mind, if you can link 8 things, as we just did, you can also link 18 things, or even 28. Just keep in mind that it obviously takes longer to link 28 things compared to 8 things. It's always going to take longer to remember more things, whether or not there is a system being applied. But when you're applying a link system to remember 28 things, you'll undoubtedly remember it faster than someone that doesn't have a system or strategy in place. So keep that in mind. Also, I want you to know, let's say you were applying this to something else. Let's say it was the 8 things that you have to do. Sometimes your to-do list has one thing that you have to do is multiple words. So you might have a check email to see if Bob got back to me regarding that one project. Well, that could simply be, if that's my only email task, that could simply be used as a keyword email, okay? And I could try to picture email in some kind of a way, try to visualize it. Now, same thing goes if you've got 8 important concepts on a test. You want to make sure that you're not using entire sentences. This link system is to remind you of thoughts and ideas. So you would take a keyword or maybe a short phrase, and then you would have to link it one by one. So let's move on here, and let's talk quickly how you can use this link system to remember speeches or presentations. So do you know what the number one fear most people have? It's actually not death. You would think that it should be, but no, it's actually the number one fear people have, and some of you already know this, is giving speeches. Now, I want you to think about what creates this fear of giving speeches, because a lot of people find it very, very tough, and they're fearful of giving speeches. Isn't it that the thought of forgetting what you want to say, isn't that what kind of makes people, scared of speeches? That's what scares people the most, I think. That they'll go up there, and what if you forget entirely what you were going to say? I know that used to frighten me a lot when I not when I had to give speeches, but when I had to do presentations in school, any kind of group projects, anytime I had to talk in front of a crowd initially, it was really tough. Now, this fear went away with practice the more I did it, but giving a speech is, if you think about it, it is a sequence of thoughts, and therefore you can use the link system to help you remember a talk. So first, what you need to do is extract the keywords or substitute words from your speech or the presentation. And the keyword can also be a short phrase, I want you to know. But it's something that brings the entire thought to mind. The keyword should remind you of that particular thought. And to do this, you can read the speech and maybe underline some of the words or phrases that remind you of the thing that you wanted to talk about. And then you link those words or phrases, as we did earlier, and that's it. So keep in mind the best way to deliver a speech is thought for thought, not word for word. So you don't want to be reading directly from your script, or you don't want to be attempting to memorize the entire script, because here's what happens. What if you tried to memorize it word for word? The moment you mess up on one word, you're going to be lost. But if you're remembering it by thoughts and ideas, then all you have to remember are what are those thoughts, and if they have to be in a particular order, you link them through the link system, and then you don't have to use notes. Then you could probably have a more powerful speech or presentation. So keep that in mind. Now, the one problem you may have when initially linking things is coming up with ridiculous images. I get this question all the time, because when I'm teaching these workshops, I'll usually propose, okay, let's try this particular image out. And people will tell me, okay, well, how did you come up with this crazy image? Well, I mean, it just kind of hit me. And here's the thing about coming up with crazy images. These images come to me pretty quickly because I've been practicing these kinds of memory systems that require a lot of visual imagery. It requires that the images are bizarre or silly or exaggerated. But I'm used to it, but if you're not used to it, there are 4 ways. You can think of them as like 4 simple rules to follow in order to create ridiculous images. Rule number 1 is the rule of substitution. And that's actually the easiest to apply. All that requires is that you picture one item instead of another item. So in the example earlier, remember we suggested that you imagine yourself wearing a pair of pens instead of shoes. And by the way, it was a giant pair of pens instead of shoes. This is a good example of substitution. Now, another rule that you see here, number 2, is putting things out of proportion. So notice how many of the previous examples while we were trying to do the link system with those 8 items, how many of those examples involved a giant something or other, or a big we said a giant pair of shoes, or a gigantic pair of glasses. I think I said giant or gigantic or big like 10 or 20, I don't know how many times I said it, but the whole point when you're trying to create those images, it's better when you can do it out of proportion. And something very similar, number 3, is exaggeration. You can exaggerate the size or amount. Maybe try using the word millions to create this effect. And the last rule is action. Action is always easy to remember. If things are moving around, if there's a fight, or if you're doing some kind of an action, it's easier to remember it. So applying one or more of these rules to any kind of picture will help make that picture ridiculous. Now, after a while, you won't have to think about applying these rules, and you'll start doing it automatically because you've trained your memory to do so. Now, initially, it may take some time to form these crazy images in your mind. It's interesting how, the wheels of imagination that used to turn so quickly when we were young, they've kind of slowed down by the time we're adults, right? And somehow society has that effect on us, but we can change that. We know that children never really have trouble coming up with silly or crazy images, right? they somehow tend to be able to do it naturally. However, I want you to know that practicing a system like this link system, or any other memory system for that matter, requires you to create silly images. Just doing that will get the wheels turning on your imagination. So your imagination, it simply needs exercise. And the great thing about the link system and other memory systems is that simply trying to implement those systems will exercise your imagination. And the more exercise you do, the better it gets. So that's why I told you, for me, creating these images usually it's the first thing that pops into my mind and I go with that, but it comes very quickly because I've practiced it. When I first started doing it, I had to kind of go step by step. I would actually backtrack and I would look at these four ways and I'd try to kind of go one by one to see if I could substitute anything, exaggerate anything, create some kind of action, and that would help. Now, in a short while, I want you to know that you'll find it'll be ridiculous or illogical or maybe even strange images that pop into your mind anytime you need to remember two items. Once you practice this, you're going to start remembering and linking those items in a crazy way very, very quickly. So keep in mind that making the pictures ridiculous is what enables you to see them in your mind. Things that are logical or mundane or normal are easily forgotten. But a bizarre image can stir the mind, and it'll force you to pay attention and ultimately remember things. Think about this. If you had just a regular day today, nothing big happened, it wasn't a horrible day, it wasn't a great day, it was just kind of a, normal day. You might forget a few things, right? Might be easy to forget. You probably would forget that day because nothing big happened. Now, what if something crazy happened to you today? Something completely unsuspected, or something horrible, or something really, really great. Something that's out of the ordinary, doesn't that stick out a lot more? Won't you remember that? Can't we all remember where we were, during certain points in history, right? When something very big happened, we can remember, right? Because it's out of the ordinary, and those kind of things are memorable. So if you're ever trying to train yourself, to train your memory to remember anything, you need to make it a little out of the ordinary. Otherwise, it'll be easily forgotten. So keep that in mind. Now, quick check. Can you still remember the 8 items? It's been a few minutes since we did that. But start with the pen and see what that reminds you. Really quickly, I want you to try and get it done. See if you can get it done in 30 seconds. Go. Start with the pen. What does that remind you of? Keep trying to name the items. If you're stuck on pen, just try to think, okay, pen, what was going on with the pen? What was I using it for? Some of you might already be done. If you're writing this down on a piece of paper, that's fine too, or typing it up on your screen. But I hope you can remember those 8 items, or maybe you might even want to we're going to continue on from here, but if you're watching the recording, you can simply pause. This would actually be a good point to check and review if you can still see those 8 items in your mind. And all you're doing is simply going one by one. You're starting with the pen and thinking to yourself, what does that remind me of? And then you go with the next item, what does that remind you of? And you keep on going. Now, to review them, with the pen, you remember wearing a pair of giant pens instead of shoes, right? And then if we go on to our next one right here, the shoe, you see a gigantic book wearing shoes, right? Now that we have book, we know book is number 3, and what did the book remind you of? The book, you see a gigantic book flying on top of an airplane, right? And now we have airplane, so that was number 4. And now we're linking airplane to what? What was going on with the airplane? Oh yeah, the airplane was wearing gigantic glasses. And now we're thinking of eyeglasses. We know that's number 5. And what was going on with the eyeglasses? Oh yeah, that crazy picture of that fish. Do you remember that? A fish wearing eyeglasses. And then we just continue on from here. We know that fish was number 6. So now we're thinking, okay, fish. What was going on with the fish? Oh, that's right, the fish. There was a gigantic fish bending a drill. Benadryl. And Benadryl was our number 7. And we're still on the topic of bent drill. And now we're thinking, okay, a bent drill is typing at an old typewriter. And now we've got 8. Typewriter. Now this list can go on and on. We could have kept building up on, and you really could get into some deep territory here. There are some people that do link systems for 50 items. It's definitely possible. It takes a little bit more time, without a doubt. It takes a little bit more thinking, but that is much easier to remember. Doing this kind of a process to remember 50 items is definitely easier than just trying to remember 50 items in some random way, or just looking at the list, or just writing it down over and over and over again. Now, if you are watching this presentation, I know that you're interested in training your memory, and this link system is just one of many ways to do it. So I'm going to provide here some unofficial homework that you can do to further train your memory using this link system. I want you to make a list of items and link them. Now, it could be right now, after this webinar, later in the day, but I'd recommend that you challenge yourself with at least 15 items or more. And if these are things that you have to do, even better, maybe use this for a practical use. Maybe it's tasks that you have to do, or maybe it's maybe you're working on a presentation that you have to remember. Try linking those items. Now, if you don't have anything practical to link, that's okay. Try coming up with 15 random items and see if you could link those for the sake of exercising your memory. It'll be well worth the effort. Actually, if you want to impress one of your friends or family members, tell them to give you a list of 15 grocery items and see if you could link those items in your head. And if you're really looking to exercise in an optimal way, I'd recommend you practice this link system at least once a day with a new set of at least 15 items for 2 weeks. So once a day, 15 item list for 2 weeks. And the more you do it, the easier it'll get, as you would imagine. Practice makes perfect. You'll also find plenty of practical ways to start using this for things that are actually important in your life. So with that, I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. I hope you found the link system intriguing. I hope you were able to remember those 8 items, and I hope that you train beyond just 8 items. You can definitely build this up to 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 items or more. It takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of effort, but that effort is well worth it if you really need to remember something very, very well. Now, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact me directly. This is my email address where you could reach out to me. You could also contact me through LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter if you want. Thank you so much for attending this workshop. I want you to know we also do this at companies and schools. We've done this for a number of Fortune 500 companies. We've done this at a lot of Ivy League schools. If you want to invite us to your company or school, feel free to get in touch with me or anybody on our support team. And thank you so much for attending today's webinar and supporting this program. And enjoy the rest of your day.